The stagecoach rattled to a dusty halt outside Awahi, Idaho Territory, and Rose Gardiner knew that whatever waited for her beyond that door had to be better than the memories she carried in her worn carpetbag. It was August 1878, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the high desert town that had sprung up around silver mining and cattle ranching. Rose pressed her gloved hand against her chest, feeling the crinkle of the letter beneath her black morning dress. 3 months had passed since she had written to Owen Vaughn, the rancher who had placed an advertisement for a wife in the Boston newspaper. 3 months since she had decided that staying in Massachusetts meant drowning in sympathy and pitying glances from neighbors who whispered about poor Rose, widowed at 24 with nothing to show for her marriage but heartache and an empty house. The driver opened the door, and Rose stepped down into the Idaho heat. The air smelled different here, sharp with sagebrush and dust instead of the salt and fish of Boston Harbor. She smoothed her skirts and looked around the main street of Awahi, taking in the false-fronted buildings, the horses tied to hitching posts, and the rough-looking men who paused to stare at a woman traveling alone. "You the mail-order bride for Owen Vaughn?" A gruff voice made her turn. An older man with a weathered face and kind eyes stood beside a wagon. "I am Joshua Markham, his foreman. Mr. Vaughn sent me to fetch you." Rose nodded, suddenly unable to speak. This was real. She was actually here, about to meet the man whose letters had been formal but not unkind, whose description of his ranch and his life had seemed honest in a way that made her think perhaps starting over was possible. "Yes, I am Rose Gardiner. It is nice to meet you, Mr. Markham." Joshua loaded her trunk and carpetbag into the wagon with surprising ease for a man who looked to be in his 60s. "It is about an hour's ride to the ranch. Mr. Vaughn would have come himself, but one of the mares is foaling and having trouble. He did not want to leave her." Rose climbed onto the wagon seat, appreciating that Owen had sent someone trustworthy rather than coming himself. It gave her time to prepare, to rehearse the words she knew she would have to say. The truth she had omitted from her letters because she feared it would be the end of their correspondence before it truly began. The landscape rolled past in shades of brown and gold, broken by the green ribbons of cottonwoods that marked where water ran. Mountains rose in the distance, purple against the bright sky. It was beautiful in a way Rose had not expected, spare and honest like the letters Owen had written. "How long have you worked for Mr. Vaughn?" she asked, needing to fill the silence with something other than her anxious thoughts. "About 12 years now. Came on when his father was still alive. Owen was just 19 then, learning the business. Took over completely when his father passed 7 years back. He is a good man, fair and hardworking. Not much for town life or socializing, which is why he ended up placing that advertisement." Joshua glanced at her. "Figured you should know what kind of man you are coming to meet." "I appreciate that." Rose meant it. Every piece of information helped build the picture of the man she had agreed to marry based on letters, and a single photograph that showed a serious-faced man with dark hair and strong features. They turned off the main road onto a track that wound through hills dotted with cattle. Rose saw ranch hands working in the distance, heard the lowing of the herd carried on the wind. Then they crested a rise and she saw it, the ranch house sitting in a valley with a stream running silver beside it. It was larger than she had expected, built of logs and stone, with a wide porch and glass windows that must have cost a fortune to freight out here. "This is the Vaughn Ranch," Joshua said with obvious pride. "Best cattle operation in Awahi County. Owen has built it into something his father would be proud of." As they approached, Rose saw corrals and outbuildings, everything neat and well maintained. A man emerged from the barn, tall and broad-shouldered, wiping his hands on a rag. He wore work clothes, a simple shirt and trousers with worn boots, but he carried himself with quiet confidence. When he looked up and saw the wagon, he went very still. Joshua pulled the horses to a stop. "Got your bride here safe and sound, Owen." Owen Vaughn walked toward the wagon, and Rose felt her breath catch. The photograph had not done him justice. He was perhaps 28 or 29, with dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and gray eyes that studied her with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced in a long time. There was kindness in his face, but also strength and a certain wariness that mirrored her own. "Miss Gardiner." His voice was deep and steady. "Welcome to Idaho Territory. I hope the journey was not too difficult." He offered his hand to help her down from the wagon, and Rose took it, feeling the calluses and strength in his grip. When her feet touched the ground, they stood face to face, and she realized he was quite tall. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. The journey was long, but I am glad to be here." The words came out more confidently than she felt. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the shadow of beard stubble on his jaw, the way he looked at her as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with the letters she had written. "Please call me Owen. Mr. Vaughn was my father." He released her hand, and she felt the absence of that warmth. "How is the mare?" she asked, remembering what Joshua had said. Owen's expression lightened slightly. "She delivered a healthy colt about an hour ago. Both are doing well." He paused, seeming to struggle with what to say next. "I thought you might like to rest and freshen up. Then perhaps we could talk before supper. There are things we should discuss before the wedding." "Yes, I would like that." Rose's heart hammered. This was it, the moment she would have to tell him the truth. She had known it was coming since she boarded the train in Boston, had rehearsed the words 1,000 times, but suddenly her mouth felt dry as dust. Owen led her to the house, carrying her carpetbag while Joshua handled the trunk. The inside was neat and surprisingly comfortable, with good furniture and rugs on the plank floors. A woman in her 40s appeared from what must be the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "This is Elena Rodriguez. She keeps house for me and cooks meals for the hands," Owen said. "Elena, this is Miss Rose Gardiner." Elena smiled warmly. "Welcome, Miss Gardiner. I have prepared the guest room for you. Come, I will show you." Rose followed Elena up a staircase to a comfortable room with a real bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the valley. It was simple but clean, and after weeks of traveling, it looked like paradise. "I will bring hot water for washing," Elena said. "Take your time. Mr. Owen is a patient man." When she was alone, Rose sank onto the bed and pressed her hands to her face. She could do this. She had to do this. Owen deserved to know the truth before they married. If he sent her away afterward, well, she had enough money left for passage to California. She could find work there, start over again. She washed the travel dust from her face and hands, changed into a clean dress that was still black but less rumpled, and pinned her auburn hair back into a neat bun. The woman in the small mirror looked pale but determined. Rose took a deep breath and went downstairs. Owen was waiting on the porch, standing at the railing and looking out over his land. He had cleaned up too, changed his shirt, and when he turned to face her, she saw nervousness in his expression that matched her own. "Would you like to walk a bit? It is cooler than sitting, and I find it easier to talk when I am moving." "Yes, that sounds good." They walked toward the stream, following a well-worn path. For a few minutes, neither spoke, just listened to the water running over stones and the evening songs of birds settling in the cottonwoods. The sun was lowering toward the mountains, painting everything gold and amber. "Your letters," Owen said finally. "They were not what I expected. Most of the responses I received were about wanting to escape poverty or see the West. Yours felt different. You wrote about wanting a new beginning, about understanding that life in the Idaho Territory would be hard but worthwhile. You never asked about money or tried to paint yourself as something you might not be." Rose felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I tried to be honest, but not completely honest." It was not an accusation, just a statement. Owen stopped walking and faced her. "In your last letter, you mentioned having loved before and lost. You said the past was behind you. I need to know what that means, Rose. I need to know what you are running from." Here it was, the moment she had dreaded. Rose met his eyes, forcing herself not to look away. "I am not running from anything illegal or shameful, I promise you that. But you are right. I was not completely honest, and you deserve the full truth before we go any further." She took a breath, the words coming hard. "I am a widow. I was married for 3 years to a man named Thomas Griffin. He was a clerk in Boston, good with numbers but not strong in health. He died last winter of pneumonia. We had no children. His family took the house we lived in because it was in his name, and I found myself alone with very little money and no prospects. That is when I saw your advertisement." Owen was quiet, his face unreadable. Rose rushed on, needing to say it all before her courage failed. "I did not mention it in my letters because I feared you would not want a used woman, someone who had already been a wife. I know many men want a fresh start with someone untouched by grief and failure. I understand if you have changed your mind about the arrangement. I can leave tomorrow if you wish." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of the stream. Rose felt tears prickling behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. She had done what was right. Whatever happened now was up to him. "You think being widowed makes you used? Makes you a failure?" Owen's voice was rougher than before. "I think it makes me less than what you expected, less than what you wanted. Rose, look at me." When she did, she saw something in his eyes that looked like understanding, like recognition. "I did not place that advertisement looking for an untouched girl who knew nothing of life or loss. I am 29 years old. I have been working this ranch since I was barely old enough to sit a horse. I have buried my father, lost hands to accidents and sickness, and watched dreams die in drought years. I wanted a partner, someone who understood that life out here is not a romantic adventure but hard work and uncertain outcomes." He stepped closer, and Rose could smell leather and hay and something clean like soap. "When you wrote about understanding that marriage was more than passion, that it was about building something together and holding on through difficulties, I thought here is someone who might actually know what she is agreeing to. Now, I understand why those words rang true. You have lived them. Then you are not angry that I withheld the truth. I wish you had told me sooner, but I understand why you did not. It takes courage to start over, to leave everything familiar and come to a place like this." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You said you loved your husband." "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. Not in a wild, passionate way perhaps, but deeply. "Thomas was kind and gentle. We were happy together, or as happy as two people can be when one is always sick. I nursed him through his final illness, and when he died, I felt like part of me died too. Not because I could not live without him, but because I had poured so much of myself into loving him and trying to keep him alive." Owen nodded slowly. "Then you know how to love deep. You know what it means to stand by someone through the hard times, to give everything you have to make a life together work." His gray eyes held hers. "That is exactly what I need, Rose. That is what I was hoping to find. Someone who understands that real love is not just the easy moments but the struggle, the staying when things are difficult." Rose felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of fear she had been carrying since Boston. "You mean you still want to marry me?" "I do, if you still want to marry me. But I want us to start honest with each other. No more hiding pieces of the truth because we are afraid." He held out his hand. "What do you say? Can we begin again, this time with everything in the open?" She placed her hand in his, feeling the strength and warmth of his grip. "Yes. I would like that." They walked back toward the house as the sun touched the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Rose felt lighter than she had in months, as if speaking the truth had lifted a weight she had not realized she was carrying. "We do not have to marry right away," Owen said. "Take some time to settle in, to be sure this is what you want. The arrangement was always that if either of us had doubts after meeting, we could call it off with no hard feelings." "You have doubts?" He considered the question seriously. "Not doubts exactly. More like uncertainty. We are still strangers, Rose. I know what you wrote in letters, but letters are not the same as knowing someone day to day. I would like us to have time to truly meet each other before we stand in front of a preacher." It was practical and thoughtful, and Rose found herself relieved. "That sounds wise. How much time were you thinking? A few weeks, a month perhaps, long enough to be sure." He looked slightly embarrassed. "Elena can chaperone, of course. I do not want to compromise your reputation." "I appreciate that." Rose smiled for the first time since arriving. "Though I suspect my reputation is already somewhat compromised by traveling all this way to marry a man I had never met." Owen smiled back, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer. "Fair point. But let us try to keep the gossip to a minimum. Awahi is a small town, and people talk." They ate supper with Elena serving as a quiet but watchful presence. The food was simple but good, beef and beans and fresh bread that Elena had baked that afternoon. Owen asked about Rose's journey, and she told him about the train ride across the country, the things she had seen from the windows, the other passengers with their own stories of heading west for new opportunities. "What made you come to Idaho Territory specifically?" Rose asked. "Your advertisement could have brought responses from women already out west." "It could have, but I wanted someone who was choosing this life deliberately, not someone already here who might have other reasons for wanting to marry quickly." He broke a piece of bread, considering his words. "And I suppose I thought someone from back east might bring a different perspective, might help balance out my rough edges. You do not seem rough to me. You have only known me for a few hours." But he said it with a hint of humor. After supper, Elena showed Rose to the guest room again, this time with fresh linens on the bed and a nightgown laid out that must have belonged to someone else once. "It was Mr. Owen's mother's," Elena explained. "She passed before I came to work here, but Mr. Owen kept some of her things. He thought you might need something until your trunk is unpacked." Rose touched the soft cotton, moved by the gesture. "Thank you. That is very kind." "He is a good man," Elena said quietly. "Lonely but good. I think maybe you will be good for each other." Alone in the room, Rose changed into the nightgown and sat by the window, looking out at the dark shape of the mountains against the stars. The sky here was enormous, filled with more stars than she had ever seen in Boston. It made her feel small but not insignificant, just part of something larger and older than herself. She thought about Thomas, about the promise she had made at his graveside to keep living, to not let grief bury her alongside him. Coming west had seemed like madness at first, answering an advertisement from a stranger. But now, having met Owen, having told the truth and been accepted anyway, she felt the first stirrings of hope. She did not love Owen. She barely knew him. But there was something about him that felt solid and real, like this land he had built his life upon. Maybe love could grow from honesty and shared work and the slow process of learning another person's heart. Maybe it did not have to be a lightning strike. Maybe it could be something steadier and deeper, like water shaping stone over time. Rose slept better than she had in months, lulled by the silence of the high desert and the feeling that she had finally found a place where she could breathe again. The next weeks fell into a rhythm. Rose rose early, as was necessary on a ranch where the work began before dawn. Alina taught her about cooking for ranch hands, about managing supplies when the nearest town was an hour's wagon ride away, about preserving food for the winter months ahead. Rose had run a household in Boston, but this was different, operating on a larger scale with fewer resources close at hand. Owen was up before her every morning, already out working with the horses or checking the cattle, but he made a point of eating breakfast with her, using that time to talk about the day ahead or ask about her plans. He was not a man of many words, but when he spoke, it was thoughtful and genuine. "I have to ride out to the north pasture today to check on the fence line," he said one morning about a week after her arrival. "Would you like to come? You should see more of the ranch if you are going to make this your home." Rose agreed readily. She had been wanting to see beyond the immediate area around the house, and the idea of spending time with Owen away from the watchful eyes of Alina and the ranch hands appealed to her. He saddled 2 horses, a gentle mare for her and a tall gelding for himself. Rose had learned to ride as a girl during summers spent with cousins in the country, but it had been years. The first few minutes in the saddle were awkward, her body remembering and relearning at the same time. "You ride well," Owen said as they started out. "Not as well as I once did, but it is coming back. I had forgotten how much I enjoyed it." They rode through country that was beautiful in its starkness, hills covered in sagebrush and bunch grass, rock outcroppings that looked as old as time. Owen pointed out landmarks, told her about the boundaries of his land and the neighbors who ranched nearby. "That is Samuel Cooper's spread to the east," he said, gesturing toward distant hills. "Good man, keeps to himself mostly. To the west is Tom and Sarah Williams. They have been here about as long as my father. Sarah will likely come calling once she hears you have arrived. She has been trying to marry me off for years." "She will be relieved someone finally succeeded," Rose said with a smile. "We have not married yet. Do you think we will?" The question came out before she could stop it, too direct and vulnerable. Owen reined his horse to a stop beside a small spring that fed into the stream running through his property. He dismounted and helped Rose down, his hands strong on her waist. For a moment they stood close together, and Rose felt her heart beat faster. "I think we will," he said quietly. "If you still want to after you have had time to see what life here truly is like. It is not easy, Rose. Winters are hard and we are isolated. When storms come, we can be snowed in for days or weeks. There are no theaters or social calls or any of the things you knew in Boston. Some women find it unbearable. I am not those women." She met his eyes steadily. "I did not come here looking for an easy life. I came looking for a true one." Something shifted in his expression, a wall coming down. "You keep surprising me. Every time I think I have you figured out, you say something that makes me see you differently. Is that good or bad?" "Good," he smiled, that rare transformation of his face. "Definitely good." They sat by the spring and shared the lunch Alina had packed, bread and cheese and dried apples. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer weighted with uncertainty. Owen told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father teaching him to rope and ride and read the weather. Rose talked about Boston, about her childhood as one of 4 daughters to a schoolteacher father and a mother who took in sewing to make ends meet. "Thomas was a good match for me on paper," she said, the words coming easier now. His family approved because he had steady work, and my family approved because he was respectable. We liked each other well enough, and that seemed sufficient. The love came later, growing slowly as we built a life together. I did not know any different at the time. You wish you had known different? Rose considered the question honestly. Sometimes, when I read novels about grand passions, I wondered if we were missing something, but Thomas was steady and kind, and I learned that those qualities matter more than excitement. Excitement fades. Kindness remains. My parents had a marriage like that, Owen said. Not fireworks, but solid. They worked well together, and I think they were happy. After my mother died, my father was lost for a long time. He kept working, kept the ranch going, but part of him was gone. That is what I want, I think. Someone who becomes so much a part of your life that losing them would mean losing part of yourself. That is a beautiful way to think about it. It is also terrifying. He looked at her directly. Letting someone become that important, knowing you could lose them. After I watched my father grieve himself into an early grave, I swore I would not marry unless I was sure, unless I found someone worth the risk. Rose felt the weight of those words, the trust they implied. I am honored that you think I might be that person. But Owen, you should know, I am terrified too. I have lost before. The idea of opening myself up to that kind of pain again is almost more than I can bear. What if I cannot do it? What if I hold back too much? Then we will figure it out together. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. That is what this time is for, Rose. To learn if we can trust each other with those fears, with our whole selves, not just the easy parts. His hand in hers felt right, comfortable and yet thrilling at the same time. Rose realized that something was growing between them, tentative and new but real. It was not the instant passion of storybooks, but it was something deeper, rooted in honesty and growing stronger each day. They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, and Rose felt more settled in her bones than she had since Thomas died. This land was becoming familiar, the rhythms of the ranch seeping into her awareness. She was learning to read the weather in the shape of clouds, to know when the hands would come in for meals by the angle of the sun, to find peace in the vast silence of the high desert. That evening, after supper, Owen asked if she would like to see the horses up close. He had a small herd of saddle horses he was breeding, aiming for animals with strength and endurance suited to ranch work. "This is Morning Star," he said, introducing her to a beautiful bay mare with kind eyes. "She was the first foal born after I took over the ranch. I raised her from a baby, and she is smart as they come." Rose stroked the mare's soft nose, feeling the warm breath on her palm. "She is beautiful. Would you like to learn to work with her? Elena does not ride, and Morning Star needs exercise. If we are going to be partners in this ranch, you should know how to handle the horses." "I would like that very much." Rose meant it. She wanted to be useful here, to contribute to the life Owen had built. She did not want to be just a decoration or a solution to his need for a wife. She wanted to earn her place. Over the following weeks, Owen taught her about the horses, about reading their moods and handling them with confidence. He showed her the cattle operation, explaining how they managed the herd through the seasons, when they bred and when they sold. He introduced her to the ranch hands, a mixture of men from different backgrounds who treated her with cautious respect. Joshua became an ally, teaching her things Owen might not think to mention, telling her stories about the ranch's history. "Mr. Owen works too hard," he said one day while showing her the tack room. "He needs someone to remind him that life is not just about work." His father was the same way, especially after his wife died. I think that is why Owen never married before now. He was afraid of becoming like his father, lost in grief. "He told me something like that," Rose said. "I understand it. I was afraid of the same thing, of being consumed by loss. Maybe that is why you two might be good together. You both know the darkness, so you can help each other stay in the light. Rose thought about that conversation often in the days that followed. She and Owen were growing closer, but there was still a carefulness between them, a holding back. They were both afraid of being hurt again, of investing everything only to have it ripped away. It was nearly a month after her arrival when things shifted again. A storm rolled in from the mountains, one of the violent summer thunderstorms that Owen had warned her about. The sky turned dark in the middle of the afternoon, and wind whipped through the valley, bending the cottonwoods and sending dust devils spinning across the yard. Owen came in from the barn, soaked from rain that had started as suddenly as if someone had opened a floodgate in the sky. All the stock is secured. We just have to wait it out now. Rose had been baking bread with Alina, but the older woman glanced at the storm and announced she needed to get back to her own small house behind the barn before the rain got worse. She left despite Rose's protests, leaving them alone in the sudden intimacy of the storm-darkened house. "I should change out of these wet clothes," Owen said, but he did not move immediately. He stood there in the doorway, water dripping from his hair and clothes, looking at Rose with an expression she could not quite read. Thunder cracked overhead, loud enough to make her jump. Without thinking, Rose moved closer to him, drawn by something beyond fear of the storm. "Owen." He closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to cup her face. "Rose, I need to tell you something." "What?" Her heart was racing from the storm or from his touch, she could not say. "I thought I could take this slow, be practical and careful. But the truth is I am not feeling practical anymore. Every day you are here, I find myself looking for excuses to be near you. When I am out working, I am thinking about what you might be doing, what you will say when I see you at supper. I have never felt this way before and it terrifies me, but I do not want to fight it anymore. Owen, I feel the same way." The confession tumbled out. "I came here expecting duty and companionship, and instead I find myself falling for you. It is happening faster than I thought possible, and I am scared." "Of what?" "Of losing again. Of finally being happy and having it taken away." Tears were running down her face now, hot and fast. "I do not know if I am strong enough to survive that twice." Owen pulled her close, his wet shirt soaking into her dress, but she did not care. She wrapped her arms around him and held on as if he were the only solid thing in a world gone storm wild. "We do not have guarantees," he said into her hair. "Life out here can be dangerous. There are no promises that we will have 50 years or 5. But Rose, I would rather have 5 years of really living, of loving you and building a life together, than 50 years of just existing because I was too afraid to take the risk." She pulled back enough to look up at him. "You love me." "I am falling in love with you. Maybe I started falling the moment I read your first letter, when you wrote about wanting a life built on honesty and hard work and mutual respect. Maybe it happened when you stepped off that wagon looking terrified but determined. I do not know when exactly, but I know it is happening and I do not want to stop it." Rose reached up and touched his face, feeling the scratch of stubble, the warmth of his skin. "Then do not stop it. I am falling too and I do not want to fight it anymore either." He kissed her then, soft at first and then deeper, and Rose felt something inside her unlock, a door she had closed after Thomas died swinging open again. This was different from what she had known before. Thomas had been gentle and safe, but Owen was passion and strength and wild possibility. He made her feel alive in a way she had forgotten was possible. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the storm was still raging outside, but Rose barely noticed. Owen rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me. Not because it is practical or because we agreed to it before we met." Marry me because you want to build a life with me, because you feel this thing between us too. Yes. No hesitation, no doubt. Yes, I will marry you. They held each other while the storm passed, talking in whispers about the future they would build together, about dreams and fears and hopes. When Alina came back after the rain stopped, she took one look at them and smiled. "About time," was all she said. They were married a week later in Awahi, in a small church with Joshua and Alina standing as witnesses and a handful of neighbors attending. Rose wore a new dress in soft blue that Alina had helped her sew, leaving behind the black of mourning. Owen wore his best suit, looking uncomfortable but handsome, and when he said his vows, his voice was strong and sure. "I promise to love you through hard times and good, to be honest with you always, to build a life with you based on respect and partnership. I promise to cherish the gift of your love and to never take it for granted." Rose's vows came from the same deep place. "I promise to stand beside you, to be your partner in all things, to bring my whole heart to this marriage. I promise to honor what we are building together and to choose courage over fear, even when it is hard." When the preacher pronounced them married, Owen kissed her with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears. This was real. This was her new life, beginning in this rough little town at the edge of the mountains, with this man who had somehow become essential to her in just a few short weeks. The neighbors threw a small celebration at the ranch house, bringing food and well wishes. Sarah Williams, the neighbor Owen had mentioned, embraced Rose warmly. "I am so glad he finally found someone. We were beginning to think he would grow old alone out here." "Not anymore," Rose said, smiling. That night, after all the guests had left and the house was quiet, Owen led Rose upstairs to the room that had been his but was now theirs. He was nervous, she could tell, his hands slightly shaky as he lit the lamp. "I want this to be good for you," he said quietly. "I want you to feel safe with me." Rose understood what he was not saying, that he knew she had been married before and he was worried about comparisons or expectations. She took his hands in hers. "Owen, this is not about Thomas or my past. This is about us, about what we are creating together. I want this. I want you." What followed was tender and passionate, awkward in moments as all first times between new lovers are, but fundamentally right. Owen was attentive and careful, and Rose discovered that desire could be something fierce and wonderful when it was rooted in deep feeling. They learned each other's bodies with patience and growing confidence, and when they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, Rose felt more completely herself than she had in years. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. Owen's arms tightened around her. "I love you too. Thank you for taking the risk, for choosing to love again even when it scared you. Thank you for seeing past my fear to the woman underneath, for understanding that being a widow did not make me broken. You were never broken, Rose, just hurt. There is a difference." She fell asleep in his arms, feeling safe and cherished and deeply, thoroughly happy. The seasons turned and life settled into new rhythms. Rose learned the work of the ranch, becoming as comfortable on horseback as Owen was, helping with the cattle and the horses and the endless tasks that made up each day. She discovered she had a gift for managing the business side of things, keeping books and tracking expenses in a way that helped Owen make better decisions about when to buy and sell. That first winter together was hard, as he had warned. Snow drifted deep, and the cold was bitter, but they were prepared. Rose learned to read the signs of coming weather, to make do when supplies ran low, to find joy in the small things that brightened the dark months. She and Owen grew closer still, learning to work together seamlessly, to communicate without words when necessary, to laugh at shared jokes and warm each other through long, cold nights. In the spring, she discovered she was pregnant. The realization brought joy and terror in equal measure. She had never been pregnant during her marriage to Thomas, and she had assumed it was not something her body would do. Now, faced with the reality, she found herself overwhelmed. Owen found her crying in the kitchen one morning, the evidence of her condition sitting in a bucket beside her. "Rose, what is wrong? Are you sick?" He was beside her in an instant, hands gentle on her shoulders. "I am pregnant." The words came out in a sob. "Owen, I am so frightened. What if something goes wrong? What if I cannot do this?" He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Then we will face it together. But Rose, nothing is going to go wrong. You are strong and healthy, and we will take good care of you and this baby, I promise. I am going to be a mother." Wonder crept into her voice alongside the fear. "We are going to have a child. We are." She could hear the smile in his voice. "I cannot wait to meet whoever this little person turns out to be." The pregnancy progressed well. Alina fussed over Rose, making sure she ate properly and rested enough. Owen became even more protective than before, worrying whenever she did any work he thought might be too strenuous. It was touching and sometimes frustrating, but Rose understood it came from love. "I am not made of glass," she told him one day when he tried to stop her from helping move furniture. "I am pregnant, not dying." I know, I just cannot help worrying." "Then worry a reasonable amount and let me live my life. This baby needs a mother who knows how to be strong, not one who was coddled into uselessness." He laughed at that and backed off, though she caught him watching her with concerned eyes whenever she did anything more strenuous than sitting quietly. In early December, as snow fell softly outside, Rose went into labor. It was long and hard and painful in ways she had not imagined. But Alina was there, experienced and calm, and Owen held her hand and wiped her forehead, and told her she was doing well even when she was sure she was dying. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, their son was born, red-faced and squalling and perfect. "A boy," Alina said, placing the baby in Rose's arms. "A healthy baby boy." Rose looked down at her son, at his tiny fingers and dark hair, and the way his eyes squinted against the light, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. This was her child, hers and Owen's, proof of the love they had built together. Owen sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, looking down at their son with an expression of absolute wonder. "He is perfect. Rose, you did so well. I am so proud of you. We should name him," Rose said, exhausted but happy. "What do you think?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but never settled on one definitively. Now, looking at their son, Owen said, "What about Samuel, after your father?" Rose felt tears prick her eyes. Her father had died several years before, but she still missed him. "Samuel Vaughn, I love it." Samuel grew into a healthy, active child, curious about everything and fearless in ways that gave Rose heart attacks regularly. Owen was a wonderful father, patient and playful, teaching Samuel about the ranch as soon as the boy was old enough to toddle after him. Watching them together, father and son, made Rose fall in love with Owen all over again. 2 years after Samuel's birth, Rose had a daughter they named Catherine, and then another son named Henry 2 years after that. The house filled with noise and laughter and the chaos of children, and Rose discovered that this life she had built was everything she had never known to dream of. There were hard times too, of course. A drought year that stressed the cattle and the finances. A winter so severe they lost part of the herd. Illnesses and accidents and the constant worry that came with raising children in a harsh environment. But through it all, Rose and Owen stood together, their love deepening with each challenge met and overcome. One evening, when the children were finally in bed and the house was quiet, Rose and Owen sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. It was a warm summer night, peaceful and perfect. "You ever regret it?" Owen asked. "Coming west, marrying a stranger, building this life?" Rose thought about the young widow who had stepped off the stagecoach 9 years ago, frightened and grieving and desperate for a new beginning. She thought about all that had happened since, the love and loss and joy and sorrow that made up a life fully lived. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "This is the life I was meant to have. You are the man I was meant to love. I did not know it when I answered your advertisement, but my heart knew somehow. It brought me here to you, to this." Owen took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I wrote that advertisement after watching another birthday pass alone, after realizing that I had everything I thought I wanted except someone to share it with. I almost did not send it. I kept thinking no woman would want this life, no one would choose the hardship when they could have something easier. I chose it. I chose you. You did. And you confessed you were a widow, terrified I would reject you for it. Instead, it made me realize you were exactly what I needed. Someone who knew how to love deep, who understood commitment and loss and the courage it takes to risk your heart again." Rose leaned her head on his shoulder. "We have built something good here, Owen, something worth every moment of fear and struggle." "We have," he agreed. "And we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us still, more children to raise, more memories to make. I cannot wait for all of it." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out one by one, the same stars that had shone down on a nervous widow and a lonely rancher on the night they first met. So much had changed since then, but the essential truth remained. They had taken a risk on each other, on love, on the possibility that honesty and courage could build something lasting. As the years continued to pass, the ranch prospered. Owen's careful management and Rose's business acumen combined to make the operation one of the most successful in Owyhee County. They bought more land, increased the herd, and built a reputation for breeding excellent horses. Samuel grew into a young man who loved ranching as much as his father did, learning the trade with the same dedication Owen had shown. Catherine was sharp-minded and independent, showing early signs of wanting to be a teacher like Rose's father had been. Henry was still young but already demonstrating a gift with animals that suggested he would follow Samuel into the family business. Rose occasionally wrote to her sisters back in Boston, maintaining those connections even across the vast distance. They were amazed by her descriptions of life in Idaho Territory, of the wild beauty and the hard work and the deep satisfaction she found in it all. 2 of her sisters visited once, making the long journey west, and while they marveled at what Rose had built, they were also relieved to return to their more civilized Eastern lives. Rose did not mind. This life was not for everyone, but it was perfect for her. Owen's hair started showing silver at the temples, and Rose found she loved him even more with the marks of age on him. They had weathered so much together, grown so much together, that seeing the physical evidence of time passing just made her grateful for every moment they had shared. One autumn day, when the aspens on the mountainsides had turned to gold and the air held the first hint of coming winter, Rose and Owen rode out to the spot by the spring where he had first told her he was falling in love with her. The children were old enough now to be left with Alina for a few hours, and they had gotten into the habit of taking these occasional rides, just the 2 of them, to remember who they were beyond being parents and ranchers. "You remember that day?" Owen asked as they dismounted. "When I told you I could not be practical about you anymore," Rose smiled. "I remember thinking my heart was going to beat right out of my chest. I was so afraid and so hopeful at the same time. You told me you were terrified of losing again, of surviving that kind of pain twice." He pulled her close. Now here we are 15 years later, and we have survived plenty of pain, but we are still standing, still together, still in love," Rose added. "Even more than I was then, if that is possible. It is possible, I know, because I feel the same way." He kissed her softly. "Thank you, Rose, for answering that advertisement, for telling me the truth even when it scared you, for choosing to love me. Thank you for every day of these 15 years and for every day still to come." Rose felt tears in her eyes, but they were happy ones. "You said once that I knew how to love deep because I had been widowed, because I understood commitment and loss. But Owen, you taught me how to love without fear, how to open my heart fully without holding back in case of pain. You taught me that real love is not about protecting yourself, but about giving everything and trusting the other person to honor that gift." They stood by the spring, holding each other, while the aspens whispered around them, and the stream sang over stones worn smooth by time. Rose thought about the woman she had been when she first arrived in Idaho Territory, about Thomas and the life she had lost, about the journey that had brought her here. She had learned that love comes in different forms, that each relationship shapes us in unique ways. Thomas had taught her gentleness and steadiness. Owen had taught her passion and courage and the deep joy of true partnership. Both had been gifts. Both had made her who she was. As they rode back to the ranch, Rose looked at the land spread out before them, the cattle grazing in the valley, the smoke rising from the chimney of their home. She thought about their children inside, probably causing some kind of chaos for poor Alina, and she smiled. This was her life, hard-won and deeply cherished. She had answered an advertisement from a stranger and found a home. She had confessed her greatest fear and been accepted. She had learned to love deep, then learned to love without fear, and in doing so had found everything she never knew she needed. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Winter snows gave way to spring rains. Summer heat yielded to autumn gold. The children grew. Samuel eventually marrying a girl from a neighboring ranch and starting his own family. Catherine going east for teacher training, and then returning to establish a school in Owyhee. Henry taking over more and more of the ranch work as Owen's joints started to ache with age. Through it all, Rose and Owen remained partners in the truest sense, facing each challenge together, celebrating each victory together, loving each other through the inevitable changes and losses that came with a life fully lived. They grew old together, silver-haired and wrinkled, but still reaching for each other's hands, still finding joy in quiet moments together. One evening, when they were both in their 60s and sitting on the porch watching yet another sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, Owen said, "I hope you know that marrying you was the best decision I ever made." Rose squeezed his hand. "Even when I showed up a widow, damaged goods according to society, especially then. Because you being a widow meant you knew how to love deep, how to commit fully, how to be a real partner. It meant you had the courage to risk your heart again despite knowing it could break. Those qualities made you perfect for this life for me." He paused, looking at her with eyes still sharp and loving despite his years. "You were never damaged, Rose. You were experienced in ways that mattered. You were brave." "We were both brave," Rose corrected gently. "You took a risk on me too, on a stranger from Boston who might not have been able to handle this life. You opened your heart despite knowing the pain loss could bring. We chose courage over fear together. And look what it built." Owen gestured to the ranch spread before them, the land they had worked and loved for decades, the family they had raised, the legacy they would leave behind. "This is what courage looks like, Rose. This is what happens when two people choose to love deep and true without reservation." Rose leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the familiar strength of him even as age took its toll on both their bodies. They had weathered so much together, survived droughts and storms and the countless small crises that made up a life. They had raised 3 children who were now making their own ways in the world. They had built something that would outlast them, roots sunk deep into this Idaho soil. Samuel and his wife were already living in a house Owen had built on the ranch property, learning to manage the operation with Henry's help. Catherine visited regularly from town, bringing her students out sometimes to learn about ranch life. The grandchildren were numerous and loud and brought immense joy to both Rose and Owen's twilight years. "You ever think about Thomas?" Owen asked. It was a question he had asked before over the years, never from jealousy but from genuine curiosity about the man who had been part of shaping Rose into the woman Owen loved. "Sometimes," Rose admitted. "Especially when I see something that would have interested him, or when I remember those years in Boston. But Owen, those memories do not hurt anymore. Thomas was part of my journey to you. I loved him for who we both were then. I love you for who we have become together. Both loves are real, but they are different, and that is all right." "I am glad you loved him," Owen said, "because it prepared you to love me, and I am grateful that you took the risk to love again, even when it terrified you." Rose lifted her head to look at him directly. "Do you know what the moment was when I knew for certain I loved you? Really, truly loved you? When? That day you said being a widow meant I knew how to love deep. In that moment, when you took what I thought was my greatest shame and reframed it as my greatest strength, I felt seen in a way I never had before. You did not pity me or see me as damaged. You saw the truth of who I was and valued it. That is when I knew I would spend the rest of my life loving you." Owen's eyes were bright with emotion. "Rose Vaughn, you have made me the happiest man in Idaho Territory, possibly in the entire West. Whatever time we have left, however many years or months or days, I want you to know that I treasure every moment with you. You have been my partner, my love, my best friend. You have made this life worth living. And you have given me a life beyond anything I imagined when I stepped off that stagecoach in Owyhee all those years ago. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love without fear, partnership without reservation. You gave me everything." They sat together as the sun finally disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and indigo. The evening star appeared, bright and steady, and Rose thought about all the evenings they had sat like this, all the sunsets they had watched together. Each one had been precious. Each one had been a gift. In the years that followed, life continued its natural course. They celebrated grandchildren's birthdays and attended Catherine's school performances and helped Samuel navigate the challenges of ranching in changing times. They took care of each other as health issues arose. Owen's bad knee, Rose's occasional dizzy spells, the general wearing down of bodies that had worked hard for decades. But through it all, their love remained constant, the bedrock on which everything else was built. They still reached for each other in the night, still smiled at private jokes no one else understood, still found joy in simple moments together. The passion of their early years had mellowed into something even deeper, a love that was woven into every aspect of their lives so completely it was impossible to imagine existing without it. When Owen finally passed away at the age of 73, after a brief illness that gave them time to say all the things that needed saying, Rose held his hand and told him one last time that loving him had been the great adventure of her life. He smiled at her, pressed her hand weakly, and whispered, "Thank you for knowing how to love deep. Thank you for choosing me." Those were his last words, and Rose carried them with her through the grief that followed, through the adjustment to life without her partner of 4 decades. The ranch continued under Samuel and Henry's management. The grandchildren grew and started their own families. Life moved forward as it always does, but Rose felt Owen's absence like a missing limb, yet she did not regret a single moment. The pain of losing him was the price of having loved him, and it was a price she would pay 1,000 times over for the life they had built together. She had been widowed twice now, first young and then old, and while the losses were different, the lesson was the same. Love, real love, was worth whatever pain came with it. The years of joy, of partnership, of deep connection were worth the heartbreak at the end. Rose lived another 5 years after Owen's death, spending them surrounded by family, watching great-grandchildren born, passing on stories of the early days to anyone who would listen. She told them about answering an advertisement, about confessing her greatest fear to a stranger, about learning that courage and honesty could build something beautiful. "Your grandfather said being a widow meant I knew how to love deep," she told them. "He saw my past not as damage but as preparation. He taught me that love is not about protecting yourself, but about giving everything and trusting it will be honored. That is the greatest gift he gave me, and it is the legacy I want to leave you. Do not be afraid to love fully, even knowing it might hurt. That is what makes us human. That is what makes life worth living." When Rose finally joined Owen in the little cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch, the whole county came to pay respects. She had been beloved in the community, known for her kindness and wisdom and the love story she and Owen had lived. The preacher spoke about courage and devotion, about two people who had built something lasting in hard country, but Rose would have said it was simpler than that. She would have said she was just a widow who took a chance on a mail-order marriage, and a rancher who saw past her fears to the strength underneath. She would have said they were two people who chose honesty over pretense, courage over fear, and deep love over safety. And in choosing that, they had found everything. The ranch continued, generation after generation, built on the foundation Rose and Owen had laid. Their descendants told the story of how they met, of the confessed widow and the rancher who valued her past, of the love that grew in the Idaho high desert and lasted until death and beyond. It became family legend, a reminder of what was possible when two people chose to love deep and true. The mountains still rose purple against the sky. The stream still ran silver through the valley. The land they had worked and loved remained, shaped by their hands and by the hands of those who came after. It was a legacy of more than just property. It was a legacy of love chosen despite fear, of partnership built on honesty, of lives fully lived in service of something larger than themselves. And if sometimes, on quiet summer evenings, the wind seemed to carry whispers of laughter from the porch, or the sunset painted colors that seemed impossibly bright, the family knew it was just Rose and Owen, still there in spirit, still watching over the land and the love they had built together. Their story had begun with a confession and an unexpected response. It had grown through seasons of work and joy and struggle. It had deepened through shared losses and celebrated victories. And it had ended, as all good love stories do, with a life fully lived and a love that transcended even death. Rose had learned that you could love more than once, that each love was unique and precious. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. She had learned that real partnership meant showing up every day, doing the work, being honest even when it was hard. And most importantly, she had learned that love, deep and true and fully committed, was worth every risk, every fear, every moment of vulnerability. That was the lesson she passed down, the legacy that mattered more than land or cattle or money. Love deep, she had taught her children and grandchildren. Be honest, be brave, be willing to risk your heart. Because in the end, the moments of true connection, of real love, were what made life worth living. Everything else was just details. And so the story ended where it began, with love and courage and the choice to risk everything for the chance at something real. Rose had answered an advertisement from a stranger and found a home. She had confessed her greatest fear and been accepted. She had learned to love without reservation and built a life beyond her wildest dreams. It was a simple story in many ways, just two people meeting and falling in love and building a life together. But it was also everything, the whole human experience distilled into one relationship, one partnership, one deep and abiding love that lasted until the very end and beyond. The sun set over the ranch one final time in this telling, painting the sky in colors that defied description. The land settled into night, peaceful and content, holding the stories of all who had lived and loved and worked upon it. And somewhere in that vast, Idaho sky, among the countless stars, two souls found each other again, still partners, still in love, still grateful for the courage that brought them together and the deep love that sustained them through everything life brought their way.